We read Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I have to say thank you to all of the commenters who recommended that we read it. This is our discussion, and the reason we got into the book and why we did it right now is because of those comments. So thank you guys so much.
Welcome to Next Chapter. I'm Marty, and this is Jaden. Let's jump into Warbreaker. We'll do a little bit of non-spoiler, then some spoiler review, just a little, and kind of talk through things. So first, we're going to jump in. Is this book for you? Is this kind of a book for you? So again, this book is a Brandon Sanderson book. It is a book that
you know what you're getting.
You know what you're getting. If you haven't read Sanderson before, it's a fantasy writer. He has magic systems that will blow your mind. Like, he has all sorts of rules and hard magic systems, as they like to call it in the books. And good character development. We'll get into what that feels like later in the book.
That part of the spoiler review. But
yeah.
It's a typical high fantasy. You would expect to see a lot of the themes that you'll see. He does a great job of building an adventure within his stories and a great job of connecting all of his books together. So that's one thing you'll note if you're new to Brandon Sanderson. If you are not new to Brandon Sanderson, it's very similar. It's set in the Cosmere. You know what you're getting, like I mentioned before. It's a book that is a really, really well-written female lead book, which I thought was cool. One thing to note if you haven't read it before, as spoiler-free as we can go, definitely is more of on the mature side, mature themes of things that Brandon Sanderson has written in the past. So be ready for that. And if that affects whether you're going to read it or not, or who you will share it with, be warned.
There you go. So let's jump into the spoiler talk.
Now the good stuff. If you haven't read it yet, probably a good time to pause the video, go read the book real quick, come back, and then press play.
Let's do it. So this book starts with it's Vasher, right? He's in prison, and he starts using awakening power right away, and so he starts using breaths. I want to ask you, Jaden, what did you think about this magic system?
I thought overall that it was a really interesting magic system because it has to do a little bit more with internal than external, if that makes sense. External, I think of other Stormlight Archive, where it's the storm, the light, all that stuff that is powering all of these things, whether it's sand, all these things. But in this magic system, it's like life force, what they call breath, basically. And I thought that was really interesting. At first, I will say, in the first scene with Vasher and the prisoner and all that stuff, I thought it was color, and I was very confused for the first little while to try and, is it color that's powering this, or is it life force or breath or what? I could not make the difference there. That was tricky for me.
Yeah. I thought it was a cool magic system too, and kind of interesting with how many numbers are involved with breaths and things like that. They later on in the book get into how many breaths power things and things like that, and you just get the sense of how much a life or breath is worth in this book and series. Having read some of the Stormlight books, it almost feels like you can do some of the things maybe that Stormlight can with the breath. But breaths are way more expensive, and they come way harder than a breath can. And
actually, a good point and a good comparison, because one of the things that I noted as I was reading is the difference between the Stormlight version of things, where you have to achieve another level, basically, and you do so by committing yourself. Yeah. Individually, you have that process of commitment and bonding yourself. Won't get too into it. But that's how you progress and get more and more power, more and more connected to your power. Mm-hmm. The way you get more power in this world, you buy it.
From individuals.
It's like a class system, it feels like where the rulers just have control of basically everyone's lives, and they have their life force, and they can collect it by buying it, stealing it, whatever they end up doing. Coercion.
Yeah.
But it's one thing that it felt a little bit less religious. I want to say there's a little bit more of religious undertones to other magic systems, where this one was more hierarchical, bureaucratic in a lot of its ways. Yes, there was a lot of religion involved in the book, but the magic system felt a little bit more bureaucratic.
Well, it's interesting too, because even the so-called I can't say so-called. Vasher is the good guy in this, but he has to go about getting his power through ways that are walks a gray line, a gray area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in the very first scene, right, he's telling the prisoner, he's like, hey, give up your life, and give your life to your breaths to me, and I'll kill you for you, so you don't have to endure torture anymore. And I'm like, that's the only way you can get like massive amounts of breath.
Is to get it from someone else.
Is to get it from someone else, and that usually will have to come from like someone dying to do that. Like that's.
It's an interesting concept because it's a little bit more intense. You know.
Yeah.
It's like your gain has to be someone else's loss, instead of other places where it's just continually replenishing. But very interesting, very nuanced way to do things, and it really ties into the fact that this whole book is about governments and the Warbreaker.
Yep.
Which the title itself is not as connected to like a physical element as typically you would see with Brandon Sanderson.
Oh, true.
So that was interesting.
So
it's more of a theme.
Overall theme, but also the name of a character. Did you catch that?
No, I didn't. How did I miss that?
Yeah. It's Vasher says that his name was Warbreaker at one time. They called him like Warbreaker the something.
I was so confident. He was going to be like, my name was Zyle. What the heck? What a wasted opportunity, I feel like. It's got to be.
That's his alias, though, in the Stormlight Archive.
Are you sure it's him?
I am sure.
Did Brandon Sanderson say that on some random podcast somewhere?
No, but ChatGPT just told me. So
What?
Confirmed by AI. No, and it. So you'll notice like all the sword like play and things like that.
Yeah.
The part that confuses me though is because Denth is the better sword fighter, right? He's like really, really good, and he's like Zyle could never have beaten like the guy that he killed.
Vasher, but yeah.
No. Vasher couldn't beat
Arsteel.
Arsteel, yes. And so then you're kind of wondering like, but then Vasher comes off and is the sword like trainer, the sword master in the Stormlight Archive, and so you're like, wow, like even though he's like not the best, like he's still I guess pretty good at swordplay, but
or something happened in between those two instances where he got better.
Could be. Anyways, I don't know. There's some things I want to go into with this. Remind me to get into the audiobook reader right after this comment. But I started this book with the graphic audio.
Oh.
Yeah, I started the graphic audio. Yeah. I made it about 10 minutes in, and I was like, I think I'm missing parts of the story. So I jumped back and started again from the regular audiobook. I could only make it 10 minutes with graphic audio.
I am not a fan of graphic. I am not a fan. I don't.
It seems pretty passionate about that.
I'm very passionate about this. I think it is a mistake.
Really?
It is that bad.
Wow.
It is ruining stories for me. I'm halfway through White Sands and I don't know if I'm going to finish it.
What?
I'm just like, maybe I'll just wait for the prose version to come out because this is painful to listen to.
Wow. Yeah. It's not been that bad for me. I've actually quite enjoyed it.
I mean, if there's this sneaky spoiler, but if there's any like secret relationship or growing relationship between Chris and the guy, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to throw the book down and be like, this is terrible.
That's so funny.
Well, because it's just so odd. The book is, we're not even doing a White Sands review. I don't know why I'm on this, but it's like, she sounds like she's 58 and he sounds like he's 19. And it's like, I just can't reconcile that. It just really bothers me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, he is young. He is supposed to be that young.
Yeah.
And she's supposed to be a lot older. But they're not having a relationship, at least for where I've
gotten. Their whole dynamic is so off to me. I just can't do it.
They're from different... Anyways.
That's the point. That's the point. They should be. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do a White Sands
review. We will.
We will.
It is coming.
Plenty of thoughts. Let's get back to Warbreaker. So
I stopped the graphic audio and I went to
glad you did.
The audiobook.
We did get a warning from some of our commenters that the graphic audio is pretty unique.
Yeah, it's pretty unique at times, which is made me laugh out loud when I read that in the comments.
After reading the book, I was like, oof.
Yep, I can see that.
Pretty awkward. Yep.
But so what did you think about the audiobook reader for the Audible version?
I thought it was great.
You thought she did a good job?
Yeah.
I did not like it. This is something you mentioned to me. I was not happy with the audiobook reader.
Started. So I actually started the book in print, not in print, in e-ink. I started it on my Kindle, my new Kindle, I should say. Thank you.
What kind of Kindle is it?
Paperwhite.
Paperwhite. Wow.
Yeah, but it's not actually that white. I don't really understand that. But anyway.
Do you just love how it looks, though? Like how the ink looks on there? And
it's amazing.
It is incredible, isn't it?
It's so cool. It's just the only thing that I don't like is it feels like any contact with the screen and I'm going to mess with stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So just go to the next page. Be so careful to not touch any part of the screen while I'm reading.
Does it not make you think that they need to have more technology that's like this? That like they're using this, what do they call it? The e-ink technology? I can't remember what it is. But like, I just love how it looks. It doesn't glare in the sun at all. Like you can take it in the middle, like
and
in the
it's
day
waterproof.
outside.
Like what an absolute win!
It's amazing. Anyway, so you can read it while you're taking a bath.
Yeah, sure.
If that's your jam.
So I started reading with Warbreaker with that version, and I actually really liked it. The only thing is, I had all of the names messed up, and that's one thing that I'm like, it's difficult to have a podcast and not know how to pronounce any of the names from a story.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's kind of funny.
That is really funny.
I thought it was called Tetalier the whole time. But it wasn't. And like all the names.
Teller.
Yeah, but I was like, it's just hard because when you're pronouncing it, you just kind of just blow through it. You're like, this is kind of what it sounds like.
It is really funny talking with people who have only like read the book versus who've like listened to it, because they'll like fumble over the names like that because like you kind of just read it in your mind. You don't really think about how to say it.
Yeah, I always called there's a couple people in the book later on, but Tong, I just called him Tong because I'm like, I don't need to know his like Tong Fa. Like I don't need to know that. Tong is fine.
Yeah.
It's like you refer to people like you know who you're talking about, but you just don't expect to need to have the full pronunciation.
Yeah.
Does he have pronunciation guides in his books?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Some people do. I don't know if I've looked specifically. I know that I haven't been in some of them.
Yeah.
But I think some of the newer ones have had, or maybe I'm just looking at like when I've done reviews or looked at reviews later. Yeah, the reason is because these are books. They're meant to be read. So you would think that the people who are reading the book should be like the first class citizens they know what they're talking about. Yeah. Well, it's funny when you're having those conversations with them and they don't know how to pronounce the names.
Well, it is interesting because Sanderson has mentioned this. So, like he'll be in a podcast where he's like answering people's questions and things like that, and then someone will say a character's name, and they're like, "Do you say it like that?" And he's like, "Well, you could say it like this or that and stuff like that." He's like, "I mean, it's up to the reader." So he doesn't actually have like a big like stance on it.
That's a good little tidbit. I didn't know that. And it's cool that he's like, it's a written name, so he doesn't have an official stance. Do you think he goes in and tells the audiobook readers though? He's like, "This is how you pronounce it."
I don't know. I kind of feel like he must.
He has
but
to,
sometimes I don't feel like he does. I don't know. I don't know if he's ever pronounced a name different than the audiobook readers do though, so I'm not sure about that.
Ooh, if anyone knows of a different pronunciation between the audiobook and Sanderson himself, I would like to know. Comment below.
It does drive me crazy though when I do hear one audiobook reader pronounce a name one way and then another one pronounce it in another way. I think I've had it. It must have been a Sanderson book. I can't remember.
Interesting.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I'm like, no, that's not how you say it. Like,
you guys have to agree. It's the same book.
Yep.
Interesting. So yeah, I started with the print and then I moved into audiobook, and I thought the audiobook reader was good. I didn't have any qualms with the
What did you like?
Audiobook. Okay, I have one rule when it comes to audiobook readers, and one rule alone. As long as it doesn't take me out of the story, I don't care.
Okay.
And it didn't. I feel like I was able to just cruise through.
I mean, she was smooth and did everything fine. She just made all of the characters sound so dumb. Like Denth and Tong Fa. Tong Fa is like the exception. I think he probably is supposed to sound like big and dumb.
I was gonna say.
But like Denth sounds like an annoying like twig guy. But then like you read the book and like he's described as like probably like this soldier. Like who can fight and stuff like that.
Interesting.
I don't know. Whenever I imagine him and I'm like and hear the voice, I'm like, that does not match at all.
I really did not get that vibe.
Really?
That's so funny. Typically, we have very similar takes on audiobook readers.
Yeah, no.
But I didn't get that vibe at all. Even for Dent, like I still felt like he was this heavy-set warrior.
Really?
Yeah.
The whole time I'm just like, he's just this twig that's like mercenary just going around. And then like I found out like, I don't know. I just couldn't get into it. I just couldn't get it.
And that is the one thing that I look for in an audiobook reader. So if you couldn't get into it, that's a bad audiobook reader.
Yep.
But I always imagined him just like, he's this big warrior guy, but he's basically always lounging around.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I imagined him.
Oh my gosh. Well, they made him annoying. They made Light Song a bit annoying because of it too.
Well,
it was basically all the... I actually like Light Song though. Like, you don't like him?
No, I like him.
Yeah.
But Hoyt is annoying too. He annoys everybody. Like, that's the point.
I love
That's
Hoyt,
half of what he's like exists to do is annoy the characters. And so I think that's intentional. But yeah, Light Song is a very similar, sarcastic.
Yeah. It's just the voice. I just wasn't into it. And
interesting.
Even Vivenna's voice, like I don't know. She was just some of the like her voice inflections for different like parts of the book and stuff. I was just like, I'm just not believing it. Like she just sounds too like pious and too like almost dumb in these certain situations. But I was just
interesting.
But this again though, this is where I will go into this and say like I'm not sure if it's the audiobook reader's fault or if it's Sanderson's fault that she's coming off that way. Point. And so anyways, I just think that's a interesting thing to look at. And there's a fun fact about this book though. So
I like fun facts.
I know. I want to ask
the fun fact.
I know. I want to ask you this question, and I guess it's less of a fact. It's more of first off a question for you.
Oh, so I need to know the fact.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So, do you know when this book was written compared to his other Cosmere books? When would you guess? Just give me a guess.
When would I guess? I would guess it predates a lot of the other Cosmere stuff because the connections to the Cosmere are, well. Oh, you have Nightblood, which is awesome. That's going to be a fun conversation. But I would guess before.
Okay.
I really would.
Would you say it's like first book, second book? Like, what? Give me some series. When do you think it was written?
Okay.
Give me. I know it's a wild guess.
Tell me which series he wrote first.
The very first book he wrote was Elantris.
Okay. Which I also haven't read, so that doesn't help me. I would say one of the first.
Would you say it was written before The Way of Kings or after?
Before.
Okay. Would you say it was before or after Mistborn?
After.
Okay. You would be spot on.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh,
that was
I tell
awesome.
you what, you could have easily been like, and you're dead wrong.
No, yeah. So this was surprising to me. The whole point of this is saying like
absolutely nailed that.
Yeah,
someone liked the video.
Somebody liked it because of that. Yeah. And if you notice that YouTube, when someone says like the video, it like circles the like button now. Or if you say subscribe, and it'll circle the subscribe button too.
No way.
It is really cool.
Okay, hold on. Like the video.
And subscribe.
Now, where are we at? Somewhere around like 15 minutes into the video? I will look for that and see if that actually happened.
Yeah. You should
That's
check
cool.
it out. It's pretty cool. Hopefully it does it with our videos too, but I've seen it with a few YouTubers. It's been pretty sweet. So
okay.
Anyways, so this book was written when I was reading it, I was like just getting the sense of like it just doesn't feel like he's a very polished author by this point in the book. And I'm like, what is going on? I thought this was a book that he had read later. Then I looked it up and I'm like, oh, this is one of his earliest books in his career.
Yeah.
But it did surprise me that it came after Mistborn because I feel like this book is a lot less well written than the Mistborn series.
I actually had a similar thought. Like the writing did feel like it was lacking in some areas. And I think that when I say lacking, it's funny because I would be a terrible writer, but it's too easy to be a critic sometimes, and I feel bad. But the thing that I would critique is sometimes the undertones of people's reactions to things or their specific dialogue just does not match either the scenario or their character or their desires at a specific time. You're just like, oh, that's pushing it. I don't know if they would say it like that. And not even that they would say something different, but they wouldn't say it like that.
Yes.
They wouldn't use those words or those filler words that wouldn't match the scenario. And sometimes it's that little piece of difference where you just have to say,
Yep. And that I 100% agree with you. And that's a little bit of what I was going to go into is because these characters feel more hollow to me than his characters in his later books. They feel like they don't have the substance of who they could be. Because a lot of his characters in the later books, you really connect with them. You really believe them. It's like casting a good actor for a movie. But this book kind of feels like it was cast with a bunch of amateurs. Which is so harsh to say brutal. It that way. That's it so is. Brutal. The whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, that's not believable at all that it would happen this way. Or that they'd say this. And all these things were just coming off so odd to me. And I was like, but it was also at the same time amazing to see where Sanderson has come from there. Because again, like when I read the Stormlight Archive, even Mistborn, which is funny, like I said, it was written before this. I think it's some of the best character development and best like character building I've ever like read, and that's what I read his books for now. But it's almost inspiring to see that you can go from somewhere like this, and then get to there. Like he's improved a lot.
It's interesting to see how if a character is formed in a complete and very like strong but dynamic way, it's so much easier to see that character reappear. Like if you were to take, and I have to be really careful with these names because we have a lot of Apple products, but if you take Siri from this book or like Kelsier, as an example, like, and if you were to take both of them and throw them into another book in the Cosmere, one is clearly going to have a stronger character development than the other. Like this is who these people are. And I think that comes from how were they described, how are they acting in the books that they were created in. And he just has some characters that are much stronger than others. Yeah, and they're just a lot more believable in everything that they follow their own character a lot better. I would say. Oh yeah. And this one just seemed to feel like a little bit forced in a lot of ways. Interesting. There was a lot of transformation that happened. Because you think about, you start the story and you're in the Highlands, this idyllic place. Yeah. And you've got the king and his daughters and all this stuff. And then both of those daughters have to go to Hallandren. Yeah. And they end up, completely swapping their roles and lives, and desire and piousness, all that stuff changes. So they do go through quite a massive, change in their lives, and it happens so fast. You're talking about the first few chapters. You don't learn much about them before their entire life changes. I wonder if that affects your idea of the character. Yeah, and I would agree with that. It is cool to see their growth throughout the book and see where they're changing and things like that. I don't know. There were just a lot of... Whose storyline did you like better, though? Of the two main storylines, Ciri and Vivenna. It is so close for me, dude. I want to say, I think I'm going to go with Ciri. I like Ciri's story better. Interesting. Yeah, I think Ciri's is very interesting. I think the turn of events with the God King is really cool. Yeah. Vivenna's story is super boring for me until you get to the point where she goes to the slums and she has to live like a beggar. Yeah. And that is all of a sudden where it started to feel like Sanderson. Now I'm starting to feel where she's at. I'm starting to learn about her character, and I'm seeing her just grow. It just felt like all of a sudden life was breathed into the story. Yeah, I know. But do you feel like that was intentional? I feel like that's a very intentional literary choice, where she didn't start to be interesting until she abandoned her sense of high and mightiness. Yeah. It was less like her being interesting and more I don't know. I just really liked what he was doing with the story. So the reason why I like that part of the story so much is Sanderson does a really good job of putting you in a situation. So I feel like in that moment you really understand what it's like to be homeless. And you're like, oh wow, I didn't even imagine these are the types of things you have to deal with. These are the types of people you have to deal with. This is why someone who is homeless is probably doing something like stealing or sleeping where they are and begging the way they are and things like that. And just the whole society and community that they have built around it. I thought that was really fascinating and really cool. It was wild. It was also very intense. Yeah, that very part got intense fast. Yeah. So interesting. I would say that I liked the Vivenna storyline better. Yeah. And the reason I would say that is because, you're right, especially as it ramps up is more exciting. I think the concept of the mercenaries, and my wife read the book almost the exact same time as me, so that was kind of fun. But it was I did not see it coming. And I am one that I feel predicts things a lot. I love predicting things in books. That's one of my favorite things to do. But I did not see it coming at all. And I'm like, isn't that a crazy twist of events? How did that hit me so hard? And I think my wife was like, yeah, I saw it coming. What? She saw that? I'm impressed. That's amazing. But I didn't. It blindsided me. And I was like, no way. That's so wild. The whole thing. All of it. Oh my gosh. The moment she sets foot in Hallandren, she is being like
manipulated.
I'm like, wow.
Oh my gosh,
that's intense.
Well,
and so cool.
It was such a crazy turn of events too, right? Because she goes down the stairs, and then like all of a sudden she like runs into Tong Fa, and she sees her betrothed like dead, and she's like,
oh, the scene when she finds out that
and they're like how did you find out, and all these things, which still, even as I'm saying it, like those words just do not sound believable to me, like as the characters like Dent. And
so that is actually, as you talk about the big reveal, I have a question for you. How do you think Warbreaker would do as a TV series?
I don't know. It's probably not a good question for me to answer because I was not a major fan of this book.
You weren't a huge fan. Yeah. So this is a hot take from my wife that I will claim indirectly.
Yeah.
But I agree. This would be a phenomenal TV series.
Yeah.
The amount of twists and turns and like how everything kind of changes in different sections could be a great like 8 to 10 episode series, and it'd be really exciting. And we already know that Sanderson likes to play with different formats. So having a TV series book here, movie there, animated series there, I think it could be a great TV series. I totally agreed with her.
Yeah, I think it could be really cool.
And the reveals, like the intensity. Think about that scene when she goes down and like the animals are all like on the walls, like having been tortured. Like this Tong Fa guy's nuts.
Yep.
Like all that stuff. We were just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, you had no idea. You were on this level of, oh, he like loves pets. You know, he has a new animal every so often.
And he keeps losing his other pets.
Yeah. And you're like, oh my goodness. It's so much darker than you could possibly have imagined. Like all of that is, the weight of that is just crazy. That scene in particular is, I think, built up to an intense moment.
Very cool.
I liked it.
Yeah. It's fun to see how this is like probably the first time we've had such different perspectives on a book.
That's true. When did you first read Warbreaker? Because this is not your first read.
Yeah. So the first time I read Warbreaker was probably like 3 or 4 years ago.
And how much Sanderson had you read before you read Warbreaker?
I think I read Oathbringer, and then Rhythm of War hadn't quite come out yet. And so I read it right before I read Rhythm of War.
Interesting.
Because I wanted to get
so you were right in there with Oathbringer, Stormlight Archive, then you dove into Warbreaker. Okay.
Yep. And I did that because I had to know everything. I heard that we're learning about Nightblood in this one, and so I had to dive into that.
Do you want to go into Nightblood?
Yeah, let's go into Nightblood. First of all, her voice is also not adequate for Nightblood because Michael Kramer has absolutely nailed Nightblood. His voice for Nightblood makes him sound like a Disney character at times, and then all of a sudden just like a nightmare. When he gets unleashed, he's like, destroy, and there's these like coolest moments in Oathbringer and like all the other Stormlight Archive books. Like Michael Kramer could not do better with the Nightblood voice. I just love it. Like I'm just trying to imagine it during this book when she's reading it.
I definitely did not have as many qualms with the audiobook reader in the moment.
Yes.
But I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah.
From like the Nightblood and like how intense it should have been.
Yeah.
But maybe I just am like translating it in my mind because it didn't bother me at the time.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing it now.
But he does such a good job at portraying how Nightblood's almost happy-go-lucky when he's inside the sheath. And just like, come on, you want to pull me out, right? Like just a little bit, pull me out just a little, toss me over there. And it's just like, you don't really get that sense from like her reading of it.
Fair enough.
Which is, I don't know, just the way I felt. I'm sorry I keep slamming on her so hard.
But like, aside from the reader, I loved Nightblood.
Yes.
And the fact that like learning about Nightblood now, having already read the Stormlight Archive, I'm like, the pieces just fit together so well. Just makes me happy because one of the things that you see in Stormlight, you're just like, this is so odd and it's so different. And they're like, Stormlight Archive, Shard Blades, all that stuff. It's its own system. But then you have Nightblood and you're like, why is Nightblood so different and so like individual? There's nothing like him. Like he's its own thing with its own mind, consciousness. Like how does that even make sense? It's so out of place. This odd duckling. And then you read Warbreaker and you're like, oh my goodness. I know exactly where Nightblood came from and why it's the way it is.
Yeah,
like,
why it's so crazy.
All of it starts to make sense, especially with the Sanderland reveal at the end. So great. But I love the explanation. I love that they took the time to be like, this is how hard it was to make. This is why it's so dangerous.
Yep.
Like, this is why it exists the way that it does. And why it thinks the way that it does.
Well, and it was also interesting too, seeing how it takes up breath to use Nightblood. This is again why I'm saying breath is so much more expensive than like the cost of using it is more than like Stormlight. Because when they use Nightblood in the Stormlight archive, it's just using up Stormlight. And you know how much easier it is to get more Stormlight than it is to get more breaths? I'm like, it's almost like, I don't know. I just can't, it almost feels like breaths are, I can't decide if they're underpowered at times, but also overpowered. Like it has like such a massive weakness of being able to be eaten up so quickly, even by like gods using them up once a week and things like that. Whereas Stormlight, you just get it in every new storm. Like, I don't know. It's just very interesting. I'm just thinking about the power dynamics of those two. It's a lot more
finite of a resource.
Yeah. So I just didn't, it was just interesting to me. Fascinating.
There's an interesting nuance. I honestly, though, in our Nightblood conversation, I felt like the entire book could have just been a lead up to explain Nightblood to me, and I would have been happy.
Yep.
Because everything they talked about with like how awakening works, everything they talked about with how breaths work and how many breaths are cost different things, and like the fact that it consumes, but it's also conscious. And the reason that it's conscious is because that was the original instruction, and how instructions work, and how it's like single track mind. The only thing that it's thinking about is destroy evil, and that's subjective, and that's why it became a little bit of a problem. And I just think that's the coolest way to explain it. And everything that happened with learning about awakening led up to me understanding who Nightblood was.
Yeah.
Great. So great. That was probably my favorite part of the book.
Oh yeah, dude, it's awesome. I love the whole idea of all that. So
I can't wait to see how that continues in other series, like, because Nightblood's not going anywhere.
Oh yeah,
that's a big part of other parts of the Cosmere for sure.
Well, it is, and by the way, I'm pretty sure he's going to have a Warbreaker 2 at some point. He's going to write a second book.
That'll be cool.
Which would be very cool. So probably going to get more Nightblood in there as well.
Gotta love it. Well, we're going to have to learn a lot more about Vasher if he's going to be a big part of the series.
Seriously. Okay, so anything else we want to talk about with Vivenna before we move on?
I want to talk a lot more about, when you say move on, I want to talk a lot more about like the Returned and that religion.
So I wanted to get into Lightsong next.
Yeah.
So I like Lightsong. I thought that was an interesting part of the story. I think it's fascinating to have a character that is a god of his own religion that doesnment believe in his own religion.
Yep.
It's just hilarious. So
it's well done. Yeah.
What did you think about all that stuff?
I will say, when I said that I didn't predict the mercenaries and I was like really disappointed, I probably 3 hours into this book, I was like, Madeline, my wife, Bluefingers is the bad guy.
Oh my gosh.
I'm telling you right now, Bluefingers is the bad guy.
How in the world did you pick that out? He's the only nice guy in the whole book.
He's too nice to be that powerful.
Is it
that
because
influential? No way.
Is it because he's the butler? It's always the butler.
I didn't necessarily make that connection, but it was the beginning. He has way too much power. He's involved in way too many things, and he's very nice to someone who's coming in to potentially disrupt his whole order. He knows what he's doing, and he's definitely involved.
Wow.
And I was like, I didn't know he was like the leader, but I'm like, he is bad. He is a bad guy.
Interesting. He's the only guy I trusted, and he betrayed me.
Madeline was the same way. He's like, he's the only one who's nice and helpful, and I'm like, he's the bad guy.
That's what bad guys do. They're
exactly
nice and
what
helpful.
Bad guys do. Yeah, he knows what he's doing, and so that was the one prediction. I was like, nailed that one.
Oh my gosh!
But like the religious aspect of it was always a little off to me.
Yeah,
because and we learned why. We learned kind of like, wow, everything's so weird, and it's honestly it's all Vasher's fault. But it was one of those things where it's just like, this is such an interesting religion that was almost like formed because of the situation they were in. They're like, we need to create a hierarchy so that it makes sense. Because like these people are coming back with random powers. We got to make it make sense.
Yeah.
Like, let's come up with something. And I feel like that's kind of just how it was created.
Yeah.
Wild. But the Returned even existed before this religion was created, before Hallandren and all that stuff. Like the Returned existed. Why? Like I feel like that part is never explained. And that was an open question that I had. I'm like, what's the deal with these return? Like, most things get explained in Sanderson books near the end, Sanderland explanations, nothing.
Yeah. Well, we didn't really learn much about like the gods of like that world. Like, who are the shards that are over that planet?
We didn't learn much at all.
Which is fascinating.
Do you know what the shard is?
Oh, I'm sure someone knows. Like, I think we know all of the shards, but like one of them. And so commenters will be filling us in on which one this is.
That's a good one to know. Like, which shard...
Or shards.
Or no, would it be multiple shards?
They have 3 shards in Rashar.
Yeah, but they do different things.
I know.
You're right.
Yeah.
Honestly, I am gonna lean on the commenters for that one because that I don't know, but it's cool.
Yes.
I just wish there was more explanation on the return. That's like my one thing. Where like, if they make a Warbreaker 2, great. But until then, I was not adequately like happy with the explanation of why the heck do they come back and how does that even work? So confusing. But besides the religious aspect, there were some really interesting philosophical questions that were asked by multiple people. But the quote that I wrote down, I think, comes from either Sisebron or the Mercenaries, but I didn't actually write down who wrote it. Might even be Vat. I think it's Vasher now. But it says, you protect a building, but you destroy the plants that would have grown there. Protect a man, live with the destruction he creates. That's like an almost direct quote.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of like, does she take up the sword? Does Vivenna take up the sword and fight? She's like, oh, I'm against that. I'm against all of it. Awakening. She's like, I can't do the awakening because he uses breasts and that's against my religion, all this stuff. She's learning, she's growing. But I thought that was an interesting question. So how do you feel about like, if you save a man, protect a man, live with the destruction he creates? It's like, the example they give is if you use a sword that 12 slaves gave their lives to create.
Oh, gosh, this was a hard question.
Are you condoning that behavior first? And second, would throwing it away waste their lives?
Well, see, I think the purpose of this question is to be impossible to answer.
Impossible to answer, but possible to discuss.
Yeah, well, I know. That's what I'm like that's a hard...
It's an ethics question, which are hard questions.
I know. Okay. Like you seem
I'll
like
give
you've got thoughts.
I'll give you my thoughts. Because I wrote it down. I had to think about it at least a little bit.
I just decided like, well, that's hard. Moved on. Like, you're not good.
No, I think honestly, at least in this book, there are a lot of things that are like, oh, I won't do that on principle.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of times that just comes from, this is the lens that I have created for myself, for the world. And that's what I've been taught since I grew up. Like, you think about, she lived in the Highlands, they lived in Hallandren, lived harder lives, whatever that might look like. But it's like, I can't do that because, that's a terrible thing. But you have to zoom out and recognize like how things exist to this point, like the slaves that maybe gave their lives for the blade. Does that make the blade evil? Or does what the blade does from here on out determine what that blade represents? If that makes sense. Very, very similar to the story of Vivenna overall. Mm-hmm. Is her past and what she's been a part of, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and like how she's been raised, all the royalty stuff, is that what defines her as a person? Or is it what she does from this point forward that defines her as a person? And I think that is an important question. And the reason I think that is because, and that's why I think they tell the story, because it lets you know, like, the past is obviously influential on who you are, but it's not the be-all, end-all. That's why in other novels and things they talk about how you can't just jail people because they could commit a crime, or AI knows that they're going to commit a crime. Some good movies there. It's like, you can't do that because people do change and people create their personalities as they go forward, so much more so than what they've been in the past. I think it's cool. I love that question.
So your take is to use it.
Yep.
I think it's a good take.
You agree?
I'll agree. I'll agree.
If a commenter has a different opinion, I think that's a fun discussion to have.
Yeah.
I like those types of questions, and I love that he sprinkles them in. It was so like nonchalant, I think, in the moment. But I was like, pause the book. I'm writing it down. I need to think about that some more.
Yeah.
And it's fun because it takes you a moment to like collect your own thoughts. Like, what do I think about that? Instead of just being like, oh, that was an interesting question, and move on. I usually am like, I want to go through my own thought process for it.
Yeah. No, I was more on the like more religious questions. Those are the ones that always like stop me to think about those too. because Light Song just like throws in like all sorts of questions, like it's like, are you really seeing something? Are you really seeing like the future or prophesying or whatever, as they're saying? It's like, do you believe your own religion and stuff? And it's just fascinating to see, like, it's a question of faith, right?
Yeah.
And that, which seems to be a theme of Sanderson's books, right? On theme, on faith and everything. But what's fascinating for me for that part is you get to see it from a perspective of a God who has lost their own faith.
Yeah, we've never had it in the first place.
Right, right. And it's funny to like see those like glimpses that he's seen in the future, because you get a sense of like, oh yeah, like from the reader's point of view, like it's kind of like clear that like this has got to be something that's like prophesying the future, but he doesn't see it that way. And so it's interesting to see that and say like it's crazy that you don't have like faith that you're actually like doing this God thing, but you're like, don't believe it yourself. I don't know. It's just like an interesting position to be in as the reader, to like see someone who doesn't have faith when it seems like obvious that they should have faith. They're doing. I don't know how to describe it.
No, that's pretty adept description of what the religion was as a whole, because people are very confused. Think about the head of their religion, their God King. Yeah. No tongue. Yeah. Like, that whole thing is just like, wait, what? Is this whole thing just some front for the priests to just run the government? It was wild. That reveal was pretty crazy for me.
Yeah, which was super crazy, because like it also turns like the whole idea of the priests, like you're looking at them as the bad guys the whole time. Yep. But in reality, like they actually really did believe in what they believed in, and it was the Bluefinger's leadership that was trying to take him down. So
Pancals.
Yeah, that was crazy. Pancall. Yeah. So I thought that was crazy. I actually did love the whole the twists and turns of Light Song. By far, the coolest reveal of the whole book is that Light Song was an accountant. So
it makes sense that you would.
I know. It's hilarious.
Like, it would be a god.
Yeah, I know. He's doing great. Yeah, he's like, of course, his and you find out is his brother in the end. What's his name? I'm forgetting his name. I don't even know if we have his name written down, but.
It'll come back to me.
I know. But anyways, his brother, though, he tells him the best person that he knew, and it's probably because he was an accountant.
You know what? I can see it.
Yeah, that's
His
it.
name starts with an L. That's the best I can give you.
Oh, you're right.
It's not Lamoral? No.
Scoot.
Yeah, good enough.
That's what it was.
Yep.
No, but he actually does call him the best person that he ever knew, or because he saved his daughter in the ocean. And that's how he becomes a return.
Light Song the Brave.
Light Song the Brave. I actually thought that was such a cool twist to say like, oh yeah, I was your brother the whole time. Like, how amazing would that be to see your brother go to this like position of like godhood and like power, and like you just like serve him, and like you're just helping out and stuff, and like to see that transition would be absolutely crazy.
That'd be wild.
Yeah. So I like that part of the story a lot. I thought that was a fascinating twist at the end. So.
It is. They still haven't adequately described why the returned are the way they are to me, but I'll let that go.
I know.
I've already harped on that enough.
I know it. But then, did you see coming that he was going to give his breath away to the God King to give his tongue back?
I did not see that coming.
Yep.
And it was awesome.
That was
one of the reels
cool.
I was like, as soon as it clicked for him, I was like, no way. Yeah. He's going to do it because he can heal him. Like, that's how it works.
Yep.
I was like, that's cool.
What a cool way to do things.
It was a cool moment. It heals him, and then he has all the power. It's a cool.
Yeah.
And when he goes into Syrian, he's like, what does he say? Like, stop or something like that.
Yeah.
And she's like, what?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And everything's like flying around him and everything.
Yeah.
And he just intuitively knows how to use it.
It'd be a cool movie/TV series.
Oh yeah.
Way cool.
Super, super cool. Yeah. And then the hidden armies were in the city all along. That was crazy. There's no way you could predict that coming.
No way.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone could see that coming.
Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, with the statues and everything.
I mean, it's pretty easy to predict that like these secret armies are gonna come back for the final battle. Like that much, you're like, okay. They've hinted to it enough times that we know we're going to see the skeleton army at some point. But the way that they revealed it, I was like, oh, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. Sometimes a reveal will come and I'll be like, I knew too much. But it's fun when it's like, I knew, but I didn't know really how it was going to happen. That I think is fine. Yeah. As much as I like predicting stuff in books, if there's enough of a cool twist to it, I'm like, I respect that.
Yep.
I like it.
And the fact that Vasher himself is returned, which is very cool.
And the fact that he's like both of the people from the Legends. I love that. He's like, yeah, to be honest, that's me too. Like, it turns out when you change your ideals, people just assume you're a different person.
Yeah, that was really cool. Really cool.
It was a great reveal. It also just adds a little bit more credibility. Like, there's this, I don't know if it's a trope per se, because I feel like that has such a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But it like that element of the I'm so powerful that I'm kind of like seen as lazy and apathetic version of a hero. And that honestly, you see that quite a bit in Brandon Sanderson's work, but I think Vasher does a really good job of that. He's like, can't really be bothered, but he's always going to do the right thing. Like, he's going to save the priest's daughter. He's like going to go in and do all that stuff. But you kind of just, when you imagine it, you see him kind of lazily like fighting off all these attacks, and like he's just so much stronger than everyone else. He's just like, it's whatever at this point, just go and do my thing. And it's fun, it's funny, it's humorous to see, but he's easily one of my favorite characters in the book.
Oh yeah, he's awesome, and I think he fits Raziel pretty well.
He does. I made that connection, which is why I was expecting him to say his name was Ziel. I'm like, yeah, it's totally him. The one thing I don't understand is I had the impression that I was going to understand all of the references in Stormlight Archive when I read Warbreaker.
He doesn't use a single metaphor talking about like grass is green and stuff.
Green like the grass, like nothing. None of that. Colors don't even matter that much.
I know, he does seem a little bit of a different character in the Stormlight
And I can understand. I mean, there's plenty of time between writing these books. Maybe there's a bridge somewhere we'll get.
Yeah.
But it's also like, why is the color such a big deal? Did I miss something?
I just feel like is it
breath?
No, because you pull color to activate your breath. Like, that's why they have to put you in colorless rooms and things like that when like you're trying to keep someone who has breath from using their breath. It draws on color.
True. Okay, but if you can awaken a steel sword that's black.
Yeah, or but if you can drawing color from somewhere else.
Okay, so you need color to use breath.
Yes.
It's
a little bit of a stretch.
It's a stretch for me. And that's why that was why it was so hard to make the connection. But anyway, I'm letting it go.
Yeah.
There's colors on the title and the cover of the book. Fine.
Yeah, seriously.
I'll let it go.
And then the whole metaphors thing too. Again, I think this is where Sanderson, he's become a better writer since he's written Warbreaker and he's written the Way of Kings books and Stormlight Archive. I think that if he was writing Warbreaker again, you would get more of a human touch to these characters, a little bit more.
They'd be more real.
You'd get more real, and he would start having them make like funny like metaphors and things like that, just like these little quirks that they have and stuff. You get a little bit of that now, but he's not quite there, and I think he's gotten there since.
I think that's got to be so hard.
Yeah.
To know exactly what a character would say in a certain situation.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine doing that. I think about him doing that all the time. I'm just like how do you just like think about like what would this person do in this situation or that and stuff, and then also make them still trend towards your end goal of having them get to where you need them to be in the story.
Exactly right. If I may divert back to my critique of the White Sands. This is another thing that I just could not get over. I'm like, the dialogue is what? What are they? Why would they say like it doesn't make any sense. He's giving like 5-sentence little like jokes in the middle of a battle.
Well, okay, you have to understand that it was a graphic novel. And so graphic novels are like the pictures with the little comment bubbles and things like that.
Which makes sense. If you're reading a superhero
If you've read a comic, then like it would probably make a lot more sense.
That makes more sense.
As I'm reading the book, I imagine it like a comic. Like I'm not imagining
I tried to do that as best I can. And those are instances where I'm like, okay, I can see where this would be in the square box. And it kind of makes sense. It's like he's saying his thing while he's beating up on these guys. The way they adapted it to a graphic audio, I will harp on this until someone apologizes.
Somebody apologizes.
It hurts. I don't like it at all.
Well, it's probably because they had to add a bunch of stuff on their own to like describe stuff and like because that's not actually in the novel. I'm sure of it. Like
whoever adapted it should have adapted it better. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Or just not created it.
Created it.
I think I would enjoy the graphic novel multiples better than I enjoy.
I can show you where to get it.
Audio. I probably will have to. Anyway, that being said, we'll move back to Warbreaker. But I've been reading it this week, trying to listen to it. It's so hard.
To
struggle, man.
To White Sands.
Yeah.
Yep.
Struggle.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about before we give our final review of this book?
I think I'm ready.
Okay. Cool. So I will go first. We'll leave it on a good note for you.
Okay. Bring it on. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Don't steal my rating.
We'll see. So this book for me, it is not my favorite Sanderson book. There is way... I could have
guessed that.
Yes. For me, throughout the book, Sanderson runs into a problem that I see in a lot of like authors of books that I don't really enjoy, is too much tell and not enough show.
Okay.
Throughout the book, like there are a lot of things I'm like, okay, dude, just stop telling me about everything that's going on. Show me how it is this way. Have other characters kind of talk about it in the world and just kind of bring it up like naturally. And a lot of his characters, I feel like I cannot connect with these characters. I do not connect with almost a single character in this book. I'm like, I don't really understand what they're going through until I get to Vivenna. Like, I can connect with someone who's in the slums for some reason. But you don't have to be like someone to be able to connect with them. That's the cool thing about fantasy and about stories and books, is that you can connect with people and learn through their experiences, because like you understand, feel human enough that you're like, I get it. I get where they're coming from. I get why they feel this way. And so I wish there was a little bit more from Sanderson, but I give him a pass because it is earlier in his career when he's writing these books. It makes sense. What I did like about this book, I think that the magic system is very interesting. I think that you do get some interesting story elements. And that's about it. Like for me, thought it was fine. I will give this book, I will say, the second time reading this book through, I did like it better than the first time.
Interesting. And rereadability, that's important.
Yep. It was interesting to like read it and know what was coming and listen to it. The hard thing about all these books is like you feel
leaving us hanging on.
I know. Here's the thing. You gotta know. Sanderson's books, this happens in Elantris too, but we'll get there. You read it, and then it has a massive Sanderlanche at the end. And so the whole book could have been like fine, and then you get to the Sanderlanche, and you're like, this was an amazing book. And I'm like, you can't base the whole book just on the last like few chapters.
No.
So anyways, that all being said, I am going to give this book a 7. I almost 7.0 even. I almost gave it a 6.9.
Wow.
But the thing is like 7 is about where I recommend it to people, like, or not. I am like on the line. Like this is like the lowest recommendation book like I would give to someone. I'm just like, I still recommend it to people, but like I think that this is a book that people lose their momentum from reading Sanderson books. They'll read a bunch of Sanderson books. They read Warbreaker because like, oh, I want to read about Nightblood. They read about Nightblood in Warbreaker, and they're like, I'm going to read something else. It didn't keep my attention like his other books quite did, and then they kind of get stalled out in his books.
Interesting.
So.
Very interesting. 7.0. That's the lowest you've ever rated a Sanderson book.
I think so.
At least on this podcast.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Long-winded review, but
worth it.
Worth it.
Worth it. I'm glad I was here for it.
That's right.
I think I'm going to start with my number, and then I'm going to explain it. I'll back into it a little.
Okay.
I would give this a 7.8.
Okay.
So it's in the sevens, just like yours.
Yeah.
But much higher than your rating.
Higher. 7.8 feels a lot better than a 7.0.
So a couple of things. I did not have any issue with the audiobook reader. So that didn't lose any points for that in my rating.
Yep.
I wonder if subconsciously it might have lost some in yours. The second thing for me is it lost a few points because there were some drier elements of the story. I didn't love series like whole thing. It was just kind of, I don't know. It's like, I guess the mature aspect brought in intensity to the book, but it was like intense and then like super not intense, and then like all this dilemma, but then nothing's really happening. That juxtaposition was pretty brutal at times.
Yeah,
because you're like, Vivenna's just kind of exploring for a while. Lightsong's doing whatever he feels like doing, and then Ciri's having this like existential crisis, and you're just like, okay, what's really going on here? That's a little bit too much back and forth. And yeah, so there was that. I also thought that it gained a few points because Vasher was just so cool. I honestly loved his character. I thought it was fun. I thought it brought a lot of like power to the story, where I feel like a lot of people were just kind of not maximizing the breadth, like the magic system. You have to have someone who's an expert, I feel like, to really understand a system. Otherwise, it's like, and even him who was an expert was still like, we know nothing about how this works. Because you were mentioning this before, because breath is such a finite resource, experimentation has been almost impossible. No one's been able to just test stuff out because it's so difficult to get any sort of wealth of breath. You don't just try things. That'd be insane.
Yep.
Like, you're not just going to waste 5,000 breaths trying to see if you can awaken a sword. Like, you'd never do that. So that, I think, was an interesting little tidbit of this could be so much greater, but I'm like the most powerful person currently holding breath. That was cool. The way that he had that interaction with the mercenaries, like that end of the story. I would say I was pretty influenced by the Sanderlanche in this one.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be. But it was, I thought it was a good end to the story, a good wrap up. I thought it was cool how I predicted Blue Fingers from the beginning.
Yeah.
That didn't affect my rating, but it's still kind of cool.
It affected your rating, gave you an extra point.
At least an extra 0.1.
Yeah.
No, I gave it a 7.8. It's in the recommend category. It's definitely higher than other books that I've read and reviewed, but it's not. It's definitely not an 8 book for me.
Mm-hmm.
Far beyond to be a 9 book. But yeah, I think high 7s is a good place for it. 7.8.
Okay, well, there you have it. Tell us if you agree. What is your review of Rhythm of War? What in the world? Warbreaker. My goodness,
so close.
Lots of
so
war.
Close.
Lots of war.
What's your decimal rating out of 10?
Yep. That's
Go out as many decimal places as you would like, as many as you need.
That's what we do here. And remember to like and subscribe. See what we think of Elantris when we read that book next. So,
yep. See you next time.